Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, November 28th, 2024, and you're listening to Alex's News. In Riverside today, expect a mild day with a high of 71.3 degrees and a low of 55.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Happy Thanksgiving! Coming up on today's show, we'll examine the potential impact of Donald Trump's proposed tariffs on Canada and what they could mean for trade relationships across North America. Then, we'll explore the growing concerns among health experts about the recent surge in bird flu cases. Finally, we'll look at Australia's ambitious plan to restrict social media access for teenagers and the challenges of implementing such regulations. All this and more, coming up on Alex's News. We begin tonight with major economic news that could affect millions of Americans. President-elect Donald Trump has announced sweeping new tariffs targeting some of America's closest trading partners. For more on this developing story, we're joined by our economic correspondent Ethan Parker. Ethan, what exactly is Trump proposing here?
Grace, according to the New York Times, Trump plans to implement substantial tariffs immediately upon taking office in January 2025. That's just 400 days from now. We're looking at a 25% tax on goods from Canada and Mexico, plus an additional 10% tariff on Chinese products. The stated goal is to pressure these nations into helping curb drug trafficking and illegal immigration.
How is Canada responding to this announcement?
ABC News reports that Canada isn't taking this lying down. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has already convened an emergency virtual meeting with provincial leaders. Their Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, is particularly concerned, and they're already drafting plans for retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, similar to their response back in 2018 during Trump's first term.
Let's talk about the potential impact on American consumers. What can people expect to see?
According to The Independent, Grace, we could see widespread price increases across multiple sectors. For instance, since Canada supplies over 3.8 million barrels of crude oil daily to the U.S., gas prices could jump anywhere from 25 to 75 cents per gallon. We're also looking at higher prices for vehicles, electronics, fresh produce, and even everyday items like toys and clothing.
There's been some discussion about the drug trafficking justification for these tariffs. What do the numbers tell us?
That's an interesting point, Grace. The data actually shows a significant disparity. U.S. Customs reports indicate only 43 pounds of fentanyl were seized at the Canadian border last fiscal year, while the Mexican border saw over 21,100 pounds. It's also worth noting that more than 90% of all fentanyl seizures occur at legal ports of entry, not unguarded border areas.
And just how significant is our trade relationship with Canada?
It's massive, Grace. We're talking about $3.6 billion Canadian dollars in daily cross-border trade. To put that in perspective, Canada provides 60% of our crude oil imports, 85% of our electricity imports, and they're our largest foreign supplier of steel, aluminum, and uranium. Barrett's. Based on historical data from Trump's first term, we could see price increases of 10 to 30% on tariffed goods, with some products, like washing machines, costing up to $92 more per unit.
Thank you, Ethan, for that comprehensive breakdown. We'll certainly be keeping a close eye on this developing story. Our second story tonight focuses on growing concerns over bird flu. Joining us now is our health correspondent, Chloe Martinez, with more details on this developing situation. Chloe, what's behind these intensifying fears?
Grace, public health officials are increasingly worried about H5N1 bird flu, with multiple concerning developments emerging. According to NPR's recent reporting, we're seeing the virus spread through more than 670 dairy herds across 15 states, with particularly severe outbreaks in California and the Texas Panhandle.
What about human cases? Are we seeing more of those?
Yes, and that's one of the most troubling aspects. We have a teenager in British Columbia who's currently in critical condition with acute respiratory distress syndrome, and a child in the San Francisco Bay Area has also been infected. According to regional health authorities, dozens of people have now contracted the virus through contact with infected cattle and poultry. What's particularly concerning is that some cases have no clear infection source.
That sounds serious. How is this affecting our food supply?
Well, Grace, the virus has now been detected in raw milk on store shelves, which is unprecedented. Dr. Michael Osterholm, a leading epidemiologist, has noted that control efforts have largely failed. The virus is spreading through multiple routes: contaminated milk, rodents, and human contact. Plus, its presence in wild birds creates continuous opportunities for new outbreaks.
What are scientists most worried about, Chloe?
According to Dr. Louise Monclaw from the University of Pennsylvania, genetic sequencing has revealed mutations that could make the virus better at infecting human cells. There's also concern about what experts call mixing vessels, animals like pigs where different viruses can combine. Dr. Deborah Birx from the George W. Bush Institute emphasizes that this unpredictability makes comprehensive tracking absolutely crucial.
And what's being done to address these concerns?
Health authorities are implementing enhanced surveillance and testing programs, with particular attention to monitoring asymptomatic cases. They're also strengthening protective measures and working closely with the dairy industry. However, as Dr. Ja One-Quarter RGEN Richt points out, a new strategy might be needed, possibly including a vaccine campaign.
Thank you for that comprehensive update, Chloe. We'll continue to follow this developing story. Here are some other headlines. Bolivia is facing a severe economic crisis, as its foreign reserves have plummeted from $15 billion in 2014 to less than $2 billion today. The country is experiencing widespread fuel shortages, with long lines at gas stations, while food prices have doubled in recent months. Political instability between President Luis Arce and former President Evo Morales has further complicated the government's response to the crisis. Conservative commentator Candace Owens has been barred from entering New Zealand just weeks after being banned from Australia. Immigration New Zealand cited her previous Australian ban and controversial statements as reasons for the rejection. Owens had planned speaking engagements in both countries. Two of London's most historic markets are set to close, ending a millennium of tradition. Smithfield Market and Billingsgate Market, which handle over 100,000 tons of meat and 25,000 tons of fish respectively each year, will remain open until 2028 before closing permanently. The City of London Corporation has promised financial support to help traders relocate. The Northern Lights may be visible across parts of the northern United States this Thanksgiving weekend. States including Washington, Montana, Minnesota, and Maine have the best chance of viewing the aurora between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Clear skies and minimal light pollution will be essential for optimal viewing. And in Florida, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg has dined with former President Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, marking a significant meeting between the two figures, who have had a contentious relationship since Trump's social media suspension following January 6, 2021. And now for our third story of the morning. Australia has just taken a bold step in regulating social media use among young people. Joining us to discuss this groundbreaking legislation is our tech correspondent, Ethan Parker. Ethan, tell us about this new law.
Thanks, Grace. Just today, Australia's Senate has passed what's being called a world-first piece of legislation that will effectively ban children under 16 from using social media platforms. According to ABC News, the bill passed with 34 votes to 19 in the Senate, following an earlier House approval of 102 to 13.
What exactly does this mean for social media companies operating in Australia?
Well, Grace, as reported by OPB, platforms like TikTok, Facebook, Snapchat, Reddit, X, and Instagram could face hefty fines of up to 50 million Australian dollars. That's about 33 million US dollars if they fail to prevent users under 16 from creating accounts. However, they'll have a 1-year implementation period before any penalties kick in.
That's quite significant. How will these platforms verify users' ages without compromising privacy?
That's an interesting point, Grace. The legislation actually includes specific privacy protections. According to Petapixel's reporting, platforms won't be allowed to demand government-issued ID or require digital identification through government systems. This has led to some platforms arguing that the law is unworkable.
I understand there's been both support and opposition to this law. What are people saying?
The response has been mixed. Online safety advocates, including campaigner Sonia Ryan and Wayne Holdsworth, whose children were victims of online predation and sextortion, strongly support the measure. However, there are significant concerns. Senator David Shoebridge from the Greens Party and Christopher Stone from Suicide Prevention Australia have warned about potentially isolating vulnerable youth, particularly in regional and LGBTQI communities.
Are there concerns about enforcement?
Absolutely. Current data shows that 34% of Australian teens already use VPNs to access restricted content. Some critics, as reported by multiple sources, argue that the legislation was rushed through Parliament to appeal to parents ahead of general elections due by May 2025. That's about 6 months from now.
Thank you for that comprehensive overview, Ethan. We'll certainly be watching how this develops.
Thank you, Grace.
That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 3.5, the Perplexity API, and the Google Cloud Text-to-Speech API. Hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.